power button.
One call to and ask for a recommitment to be a judge, election judge next time around for the appointments.
Thank you. Which book did it?
Yeah, that's what we'll be working on. It's called everybody. There's a big list of people who didn't respond.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'm going to go ahead and call roll myself. We don't have our secretary available. It's going to go by what we have at present, both on the Zoom. So let's keep the Zoom open. You can put that back to where it was.
Right.
At present, I see William David Griggs, present.
Present.
Elaine Campbell,
Present.
self as chair, Eric Seville, present. And then online, I believe I see Alexis Denard,
Present.
Wendell Lowe,
Present.
Millie Dominich.
I'm present online.
Okay, is there any other SEAC members online present? Okay, with the number that we currently have, we don't currently meet quorum. So we won't be taking any action with respect to this evening's meeting, but we will continue with the meeting in terms of the agenda that we currently have posted. The Elections Administration, Jayla, do we have, was a legal notice posted?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave you know, posted on the 23rd.
Okay, and at present, I'd move to open the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
This meeting is currently open. Item 2, public comments on topics for discussion. We have listed an agenda with topics for discussion. Is there any current public comment with respect to the discussion items? Anyone online? Anyone present? If not, we'll move on to the topics for discussion. The initial is review and discussion of the 23 joint special elections. At this time, I turn it over to Michael Scarpello to provide us the summary.
Good evening. Eric, I think one thing you wanted to maybe do prior to is to maybe introduce or release the new CI member.
I am so sorry. That's a very good point. We have 2 new members, I believe.
How about 3?
3. Do we have 3 present? I think, well, we'll just start with Mr. Griggs, William David Griggs. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You've just been appointed to the SEAC Commission. Just whatever you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it.
Well, sure. I've been around in Texas for 35 years. Moved here from Tennessee. I'm an attorney, former civil prosecutor at FTC in private practice. I've had quite a bit of election experience. I have been an election judge or alternate judge in Addison since 1994. So that's about 28 years. So I've had quite a bit of experience, working elections. I've been involved in the political world as well, and happy to be here. Thanks for the appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Griggs. And then I believe we have one other that is online. Is that Ms. Lowe? Linda Joyce Lowe?
Yes,
Like to share
Good
something?
evening.
Ms. Lowe?
good evening. And I too am excited about the appointment is on this committee. I'm a retired federal employee. I worked for HUD for 42 years and I've been in the election process in various roles, but more recently as an election judge, which I do enjoy. And we've had a lot of exciting times with both parties. I mean, when it comes to the Republican Party, they've sent 2 judges in the last election who we've decided to be best friends for life. And where I go, they said they're traveling with this election judge. So I'm real excited about it. And as alternates, they are alternates to our team. This is excited, like an exciting time. And I just hope whatever I can bring to the table will move this team forward. Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Lowe. This time, I think that's everyone that was new. I'll pass the meeting over to Mr. Scarpello.
Good evening, everyone. So we're going to just review the 2023 joint elections. First off, just some basic statistics about the election. And compare that to the 2021 or May 21 and May 19 election. So if you, on the first slide, you see that, the turnout for this election was 45,351 people. We used 366 vote centers, and that was, we were in the low turnout model. The new low turnout model that was recently implemented by Commissioners Court. We had just some, to give you the idea of the utilization of those locations. Even though we had less locations, we still had a lot of locations that were underutilized. We had 136 locations with under 50 voters and 65 locations with under 25 voters. I think there was as few as 1 voter, 2 voters at several locations. Election staffing, we had 1,577 workers in this for this election, but we had 2,376 workers available. So we had this surplus of almost 800 workers that were available to work for this election had we needed them. And that's quite huge contrast to a year ago in May of 2022, where we had a deficit of 320 workers. So made some great progress there. Election turnout, this kind of a breakdown, not only the turnout by election, but also by type. And so you'll see that for the May 23 election, it was 8.85% overall turnout as compared to 9.63% turnout 2 years ago and 9.88% turnout 4 years ago. But then you'll also see the breakdown of how many people voted by mail versus how many voted early voting and how many voted on election day. And you're seeing a continued trend of increased numbers of people voting early voting. Election costs, as we know, all costs seem to be going up these days. You know, so our equipment and building rental, personnel, supplies, services, postage, transportation, mileage, everything's going up for us. And we know that plays, that puts a lot of stress on the participating jurisdictions. And so we've worked very hard using our analytics, reducing the number of polling places, reducing the equipment and personnel distributed to those locations to try to save money for those jurisdictions. And so we were really lean for this election. The final cost for the May 6th election won't be known for a while because the bills for these elections come in for weeks and months after the election. So typically, I think we try to get the billing done within 180 days, the final billing. So we're trying to shore that up, make that a shorter timeline, but it will be a while before those are done. Just election wait time, there was virtually no wait times for this election. The average between early voting and election day was 12 seconds. Wait time is still a little problematic in that it's dependent upon judges to report that wait time through a wait time ticket. We're getting better and better compliance as we harass the judges all day. You know, if they don't report, we're on the phone with them saying, "Why have to report it? Why have to report it?" So it's all part of our election day plan. So the compliance is getting much more better, which would be really important when we get to a 2024 election when we actually may have some lines. So on the following slides, I'm going to talk about. You're going to see some slides that you've seen before. And because when we met in January, we had these similar slides that talked about kind of team by team within our department, voter registration team, the voting sites team, et cetera. What was done in 2022 as far as tactical plan, their tactical changes, and then what was planned for 2023. And so what we're going to report on is how successful we were on those 2023 changes for the May election. And just as a reminder, the tactical plan is, you know, we have a strategic plan, you know, where do we want to go as an organization? But then the tactical plan is the real, where the real meat and potatoes is at, to say, how do we achieve our goals? And then, just as a point of reference, those tactical plans are then kind of summed up into what the county requires for every department is our objectives and key results. And so those are kind of like our major tactical plans and sometimes combined into these, a dozen or so major objectives and key results. And those for 2024 are due in July. So the ones in 2023, we're going to kind of talk about, but the ones for 2024, the tactical plan changes are pending. And the OKRs are pending because right now what we're doing is we're analyzing the success of the 2022 election and the 2023 election, as well as all the new legislation that has been passed. And I can't remember the current number of bills. We're still waiting for the summary from the Secretary of State's office of those final signed bills. But we're frankly not waiting for their summary because we've tracked all along and we have our own summary. We've already put the plans in place of analyzing those bills, putting those bills into our tactical plan. What do we need to do? There's kind of a domino effect. If there's a change, bill changes this aspect of how we do business, it might affect another aspect and so on. So we're doing all that analysis now, figuring out what we have to change going into this present or this year, which, most of these bills kick in September. So that's kind of in progress, the tactical plan and the OKRs. So the executive team, I mentioned the use of analytics. This was a huge area of growth for us in 2022 and 2023. Once again, this is similar to what you guys saw in January. So for this year's use of analytics, probably the biggest growth area for us was, we continue to refine our projection models, how many people are going to vote, when they're going to vote, where they're going to vote. We ran those by SMU, the mathematicians and statisticians at SMU this year. Right. And because we said, well, we're kind of amateurs at this and we know elections, but statistics, I always tell my staff, you should have paid attention in math class. And because we analyze everything by the numbers. And so we took our models and we ran them up against SMU and we said, how can we improve them? And they said, we don't think you can improve them. We think you're right on target. And so we're continuing to use those models and they continue to prove helpful to us in May, where we accurately, to a certain extent, projected turnout. So I think for this election, we projected 9% turnout, and it ended up being 8.85%. We projected, vote center by vote center, and that varies. Sometimes you miss, sometimes you hit. But we also, a key component to that projections and analytics is to not only project, but then to monitor. So we monitor on an hour by hour basis and then adjust accordingly if necessary to deploy more personnel or more equipment, personnel, et cetera. Personnel improvements, in 2022, we had great problems with personnel shortages like everyone else. So we've done an awful lot this last year with raising salaries, doing a lot of other things. We had a lot less COVID and weather-related loss of labor hours this last year. Better collaboration with our temp agencies, paying them higher rates, doing things like that. We've developed a new HR and records department internally to help improve our employee relations and to do better start the process of providing employee feedback in the form of evaluations that have frankly never been done here before. And to lay out clear paths for everyone, what their expectations are. And that's in the form of E-Date, like I've talked about in the past. E-Date, that mean that tool that we use to take all the. Got something going on here. So that's to take all of the knowledge out of people's heads and put it not on paper, but into computers. And so E-Date helps us basically, we have all of our election tasks, hundreds or thousands of tasks that are broken down by department, by function, by personnel, by date, et cetera, sorted, sortable, filterable. And so basically someone comes in the morning and they see, here are my tasks related to what I need to do to get the election done. So that in fact, then makes the personnel, our staff's jobs easier and hours less, stress less, and to try to retain more people. So last year we had 15 vacancies. And we're down to 3 current vacancies, and we were almost at full capacity this year. We just lost 2 recent departures, one more money to external IT department and one to another county department, but we're almost at full employment. So we're very happy about that here. Election day management improvements, our operations center in this room, election day, it's a very sophisticated operation. 3 phone banks, 7 response teams, or phone banks that log in calls, put them into the ASCII help desk ticket system, 7 response team that operates on those tickets. We continue to refine that. Probably going to replace that system with an internally built system for this future, but right now we're dealing with that and continuing to make improvements with it. We had a new security plan this last year, collaborated with FBI, sheriff, local law enforcement to develop this new security plan that had never been had before. And we're continuing to refine this. In fact, just a week and a half ago, we had a tabletop exercise with all of the county departments participating with the sheriff's office and facilities, and not only in our operations center here, but in our operations center downtown. And we went through multiple scenarios talking about, bad things that, how would we respond, and did those walkthrough with the tabletop. And we will take the results of that and continue to refine our security plan. That's on this right here. And we also beta tested an increased participation by the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office has participated as they drive around technicians. So we have sheriffs in the field, but they hadn't been focused on law enforcement. And most law enforcement was through local, Dallas, city of Dallas, and our various city police departments. But there was some concern by Commissioner's Court that may not be enough going forward. So going into the presidential election cycle, we're having the sheriff's office having increased presence. So we had them be a key part of the operations center here, where they had a lot of people in the field ready to respond. Though they really, frankly, weren't needed for this election because it was kind of a low stress election. We continue to do a deeper dive on help desk tickets. When we get these calls, it used to be that we never really logged the calls. We only logged the serious calls. And so now we log every single call that comes in here, not only on election day, but we're doing that now throughout the year. So that we can take those tickets and most of them are, when I go to the next slide, most of those, we had 2018 tickets for the May election. Of those, 1,738 of them were kind of standard election related questions. Hey, I don't remember how to do X. And so we get them on the phone. We say, oh, open up your judge notebook, go to page 4, where you see the procedure. And so Then of the remaining 280 tickets involved identified issues. And so we kind of broken those into 4 categories. So electioneering activities, equipment issues, poll worker conduct and performance issues, and facility issues. And so what you'll see here is we had 7 electioneering activity issues, 221 equipment issues, 13 facility issues, and 39 poll worker conduct and performance issues. So this is a little bit more of a breakdown. So 5 instances of electioneering within the 100-foot marker, 1 instance of a campaign interfering with a rival candidate signs. I mean, these are the types of things, that very, sometimes they're actionable and sometimes they're not. So sometimes we can do something about it, and sometimes it's like the law doesn't allow us to do something about it. 1 instance of a campaign or disagreeing with the location of the 100-foot marker. So, I mean, they can disagree all they want. You can go talk to your state senator because 100-foot. And so if they call that, it's really not an issue. It's a problem. Equipment issues. 9 question.
Sorry, I just got here late, but would you how does this compare to previous years or previous instances that we've had this report? Or
So
this type-
if you remember, and so that's what we're doing a little deeper dive and figuring out different ways to kind of look at this, so we can have those comparables from election to election. We previously were reporting in a different manner, and so so this is kind of a new report with a little bit more detail, so you can see it, because we were doing a little bit more generic things like trying to remember from the last one how we. So we bunched them up a little bit more, and we said these were issues that were preparation issues, that we didn't do something right, or an issue that was a training issue, or a technical issue that, so that we may blend the two. Right now, we're just kind of experimenting with it. But we know that there were some folks that wanted to see a little bit more detail, so we're trying to provide some summary information, as summary as possible, but also with more detail. Question.
Yes, my question, I know previously we've had conversations back and forth about concerns, issues that occurred on that day, from staffing to just generic concerns. And initially, I'm looking at your email now, it was said that there were no staffing issues and that there was no reports of staffing shortages, staffing shortage. And I'm seeing that there were 36, there were several no-shows on that day.
So I'm gonna get to that one second.
Okay.
I'll answer your question.
Then my other question was, so how are you collecting this data that you're sharing with us? It's a new process now. So what is that process that is new now when they're submitting concerns?
Well, first and foremost, that we're logging every single ticket instead of just, a lot of times we just would handle it, wouldn't log it. So we wouldn't have the information.
So it means that the election person is making a phone call?
In some cases, it just depends. So we might get a call, for instance, we have a phone bank in this next room where we have 35 people taking the judge hotline, we call it. And so the judge might call in, I don't have a person who didn't show, up. They would log that as a ticket. And then then the response team, the voting sites, the personnel team would see that that person hasn't shown up, and they'd send a report, and they'd call and, hey, are you gonna show up? Or they'd send a replacement.
So that's online, they're submitting their concerns online.
Yeah, it's all through a ticketing system, yes. And so some things, before someone calls in, how do I do process X? Well, I'll just go to page 4, and they'd still log the ticket, because we want to get that information so we can see what are our people not getting? Is there something in the training we need to improve on? Because if we see a whole trend of some people not getting something, then we need to.
Good day.
Right. So to get back to the previous question, though, what we're seeing is we can continue to see the trend going down. our percentages are getting lower and lower and lower every election because the training's better, we're refining, we're analyzing, and we're, trying to prevent those problems. So the trend lines are definitely going down in every single category. We did have 9 instances of equipment not being programmed. That's clearly a mistake. So out of some 3,000 pieces of equipment, 9 of them went out, not being prepared properly. I will say this, we did have a little issue with some of those machines because 4 weeks prior to the election, on the eve of programming all of our equipment, half of our election hardware staff left. And so we lost our election hardware manager, and that's to the IT person who left to another external agency. And then we lost someone to an internal agency, went to facility. And so we had half the staff that we normally did. So the fact that we only had 9 instances of equipment not being programmed properly was a huge win in my mind, and that proved that our processes of documentation, of using checklists helped prevent a bigger disaster, because it used to be everything was in people's heads, and instead of documented with documentation. And so we were becoming more bulletproof to losing those folks. Now, I will say this, and this is a recommendation I'm going to be bringing to Commissioners Court, and if we could take an action, I'd love for you guys to endorse it. It seems to me, this is the only county this has ever happened to me, where I lost an employee right before an election to another county department. In my other counties, in my other 3 states that I was in, the department director would have called and said, "Hey, I'm going to hire one of your guys. Is that going to be a problem?" And I would have said, "Yeah, we were starting to program equipment next week." And these would have said, "Oh, we'll hold off on that hiring because we're all one big county team." So that's something, that's a policy I'm going to recommend to Dallas County. Hopefully Commissioners Court or county administration implements a policy like that, because that could have hurt us really bad. 22 instances of broken or missing equipment. Typically the breaks typically happen when people are setting stuff up. Usually most of the time it's the legs on those voting machines. Only 7 instances of ballot jamming. Ballot jamming was a big problem in November of last year. And when we had all the equipment serviced, the vendor discovered basically a big, some wear and tear. A band was getting stretched out and causing some jams in a lot of those vote tabulators. And so I think we had a high number in November. We had a very low number here. So that 7 is a very good number. 15 critical technical failures. I'm not sure what those were. 40 instances of e-pollbooks receiving spotty internet connection. So that's just an ongoing problem where we have our cradle point machines that receive both an AT&T signal and a Verizon signal so that you can have as good coverage as possible, but some locations are just not great coverage. So when we did a call like that, we say, take your cradle point, move it around the building, and then they try to find that best spot where they can get the best reception. So, and we ended up having reception at all of those locations. It's something that you have to address. Facility, 7 instances of a facility representative not showing up to unlock the vote center by 5:30. That number's down, believe it or not. Because after we did our surveys this last year, we acquired a lot more information about these facilities and a lot more backup contact numbers, et cetera. So we were able to react a lot better than we would have in the past. Co-worker conduct and performances. So 3 instances of inappropriate conduct by a co-worker, 36 instances of a co-worker not showing up. So as far as the no-shows, when we say we had no You're always gonna have no-shows, and people, someone dies, or someone gets sick, someone can't get to their car to start. So 36 out of 1,500, not bad. From our perspective, what we look at is, did we fill? And so we get the call, we have people here on standby, they report to work, and we immediately deploy them out. We also have a bunch of students that are waiting at home by their phone at 6 in the morning, and then we call and we say, hey, we got a vacancy, can you run over to this location? So those 36 no-shows were filled right away. The biggest problem we had probably was some poll workers, judges saying, I don't have enough poll workers. And we said, yes, you do, because the numbers don't justify providing you with more poll workers. We reviewed that with the participating jurisdictions, and I, talked to the city secretaries and said, listen, we are going to be lean for this election because you want your costs low. And we're going to get complaints. And some judges are going to say, I need more poll workers. What do you want me to do? I can give them poll workers they don't need, or I can tell them no. And the city secretary said, tell them no. Only give them what they need. Gonna piss some people off, but we want to be lean. And so that's what we did. And I think our judges are getting used to that. And what happens sometimes with the judges, they kind of get PTSD, they're like, well, last November I had 8 people and you're only giving me 4. Well, it's because the turnout was 45% and this one is going to be 8%. So people are kind of getting used to that flexing up and down, but some judges are happy about it. So moving on to any questions about that election day performance stuff, like that identified issues or anything like
I
that?
know I'm on the committee, but can I ask something?
It's up there.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious as far as on the tickets that are generated, how do you identify when the county gives out the wrong information to a judge and make sure it doesn't continue to be given out? I can give you an example of what happened to me, but it was one of those things that was really concerning. I knew what the information that was given to me was wrong, and the operator continued to insist that it was right, and it wasn't the right answer.
I don't know what I would need specifics.
There was a gentleman came in who prior he had re-registered at a new place. When he came this time around, he was back at being registered at his old location. I knew that he had registered at this new location. Okay. When I called the county about what was going on, the guy said, you cannot, it's a business, and you cannot be registered as a voter at this business. And that's not true. And actually, it was actually just a house, and old house. The bottom part of it was like an office, and he lived in the top part of it. But the guy on the phone told me that it's the county that made the determination that you can't be registered at that location, so they changed him back. That wasn't the right. That wasn't right.
Well, generally speaking, correct answer is you can't be registered at a business. We do know there are exceptions to the rule because some people can live at a business. So if it's a residence, they can be registered there. And so it's the exception to the rule that probably got to the voter registration people who know that exception to the rule. So I'm sure it got worked out.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So one, I know that in January, one of the things that we decided was to create the evaluation subcommittee.
Training subcommittee.
Yeah, not training, but yeah, I mean, we called it evaluation subcommittee.
I think it was training subcommittee.
I was looking at the minutes, I don't think they were training. But going back to your point, but it has to be documented. We can't use like a story that someone tells.
Yeah.
We have to have something documented or called in that to understand specifically looking to see if there are any judge or poll worker opportunities. So we were going through at that time, we still didn't have all of our members. So I'm just talking to Eric. So we're gonna go move forward with creating that. So before you, because I know the next Commissioners Court meeting is not until the 1st of August.
Right.
So before you submit your, when will you submit your report to Commissioners Court August 1st or?
Not sure yet. Hasn't been determined.
Okay,
Because there's a lot of, and we'll get to that, there's a lot of things to be presented to Commissioners Court in the month of August. So we're just not sure, we work those things through county administration to kind of figure out what
okay.
the work.
Okay, so if we haven't finished yet, would you just note that we are in the process of doing a deeper dive evaluation?
Well, what, talk about that, because I'm not sure what she's talking about.
Well, the creation of our last subcommittee, which is still active, still current.
Yeah.
What you can do. Yeah.
Right.
Ask Cam to be the head of that committee. So, it's every right of yours to meet as a subcommittee. And then
Which,
report to
yeah,
our group.
absolutely, which I plan to do.
Right.
But
And now that we have new members, then yeah,
Correct.
and of course, the numbers we talked about. Absolutely. If you wanted to get together and make that happen, then that could be reported
I
to.
just think it'll be appropriate for us to complete that before sending a final report to Commissioners Court, or noting that we are in the process, that subcommittee is in the process of completing the evaluation.
Well, reach out. We create a meeting for that subcommittee. You can.
Not create the meeting,
Yeah.
but that's not my question.
No, then we'll put together, if we can get to a report, then we'll do that. If not, then of course, I think we can add language to that has been totally vetted in terms of where we are. And we present that to Michael, and if he wants to include it in this report, then of course, that's up to him if that's the inclusion, but I think we can probably get something done. Meeting wise and then
Hopefully,
valued.
but this is the time that
It is
people have
not.
vacation, medical things,
true.
because it's summertime.
Very
So
true.
hopefully, but I'm just, yeah.
So let's see where we are with it, and we'll see how we report this to Michael. Be timely, make something happen by the time he does report. If not, I think that would be incumbent upon us to add something that we weren't complete. We advised to the.
Yeah, that we're still completing
Elections.
the analysis.
Right. You have a second question?
Um, Yes, my second question was, and this is regarding, the checklist that you said that you put together for, the executive team for the election day management improvement. You said you put together a checklist for election day for the executive team to make sure that my understanding?
We've got lots and lots of checklists. There's dozens of checklists here. So everything we do.
So on page 7, are you not talking about a specific checklist?
Go back. First half of the world, and then-
This is what I have for consent.
Page 7.
Oh,
Page 7.
oh, page 7. Here, I got you.
Like election day management improvement. You said that they all look at the task, make sure that. they're
I'm
going-
not seeing anything about checklists on this election day.
You mentioned that there was a checklist that you put together for the executive team. My question was if anyone out external to your team has looked at it to see if possibly there's anything missing or something that in the past has been an issue.
We don't have I'm not sure what you're referencing. We have no executive team checklist. We have a E-Day election. It's an electronic task management tool that has hundreds of tasks. Is that what you're talking about? Thousands of tasks actually,
That are done on election day.
that are done. E-Date is kind of an acronym for election deadline, assignment, and tasking.
Yeah, I'm.
And so E-Date is also an acronym for saying that we say E-, it's an E- countdown. E minus 10 is 10 days before an election, E minus 20 is 20 days before an election, et cetera. So through, we basically beginning at about E minus 90, we start beginning our election preparation. So there's hundreds and hundreds of tasks that are sortable by team, by person, by function, et cetera, et cetera. So is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm specifically referring to, because what I thought I heard you say was, the things that are done on election day, because I know that I'm always thinking about process improvement. No process is ever perfect, because things change, there's involvement. So I'm just thinking of, how do we capture how we can do things better next time? What went correct? What possible election day things are we seeing over and over again that maybe we need to mention more, or you know what I'm saying? Just
And so that's when we've talked about the logging of tickets in our help desk system and then analyzing those to find out what's the root cause. Is it a training issue? Is it a hardware issue? Is it a preparation issue? You know, those types of things. So that's where we do the deep dive, try to figure out how to improve performance.
now those tickets are only from phone calls, right?
None. Those are phone calls, emails, in-person experiences. We log everything in there.
Okay. I thought
So it used to be,
I thought
it was only a selected number of phone calls. So that's why the numbers have exploded, because we put everything in there. Election day complaints, like the paper complaints that you guys used to get a big binder full of complaints from election day. We put all those into the help desk ticketing system now, so that we can sort, filter, and really do a deep dive. And even the incident logs at a polling place, we have incident logs when a judge writes, some guy came in, he looked kind of strange, or I had a problem with this, and they just kind of write these random notes about what was a little bit off for the day. So we put everything into that help desk ticketing system so that we can do that thoroughly now.
And that doesn't just occur on, sorry, Mike, but that doesn't just occur on election day. We'll get an email to our general inbox a day or two later that says, hey, just wanted to notify you of this or that. And so we go back and we comb through our inboxes, general and personal, and add them into the ticketing system.
Yep. That answer your question?
Yes.
And to get back to your checklist issue, that there's a lot of preparation stuff that are like our hardware team, or our judges, like if you're a judge, you got checklists, right? All kinds of checklists. Well, we have a checklist here. To prepare a machine, you got to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, and a lot more. And so, and when we're preparing what goes in an ESC or what goes in a supply box, so we know what's in there, and paper is, everyone signs at the bottom of that list, whoever prepared it, so we can hold people accountable. So we're kind of setting, raising those expectations for good performance. And so those are all paying off. That's why I say our trend lines are going down. Preparation, the issues that we're seeing on election day are getting less and less and less because the preparation's better. HR improved, our HR records team. Now this is the new team we just started this last year. Robert Hurd, who used to be the deputy elections administrator, is now our HR coordinator or HR manager. And so what we saw here is, we're getting pummeled with records requests, lawsuits, et cetera, and we're moving to try to manage those records to provide information for PIA requests, et cetera. And we're digitizing, we're becoming streamlined to try to make that less burdensome, because that's taken thousands and thousands of hours away from our staff in providing these records to people that are asking for them. And what we're seeing is there's a concerted effort throughout the country by certain activist groups that are harassing election officials with these requests. They'll make a very generic request in Connecticut, and then it kind of goes through this network of people, and they ask for the same thing in all 50 states and all 3,000 counties. And so every elections office is getting bombarded with these requests. With a paper process, with paper records, we're digging through hundreds of boxes to find these records. And so that's why we're having this big digital movement to make all of our election records digital now. So that we can just do it with the push of a button instead. So that's all part of the 2023 technical plan, and we started the first phase of that for the May election, where we have now this records team that is pulling all the records together and starting to scan, starting to store things in a different way to make them more accessible. We never used to have to worry about that because there weren't all these records requests. We're also doing this, continue to do the comprehensive HR management program, you know, revising our HR policies, coming up with electronic forms for overtime requests so we can manage our overtime better, electronic forms for time off and for, you know, other things. And so it's not a paper-based process anymore. You pull up a form, you hit it, it routes it to your manager, it routes it to HR, blah, blah, blah. So continuing to build that infrastructure. I talk about infrastructure all the time, and building that electronic infrastructure is a huge, huge deal. So HR and records team is a big, big part of that. This is kind of talking about the inventory records and records storage management system. We may go out for bid on that, or we may borrow from another county department, because the whole county is kind of moving towards the digitization of election records. I already talked about the refinement of our election security plan. That's also part of the HR team. Our administration team, payroll improvements. So once again, payroll was always a paper-based system, using calculators, writing stuff down, etc. And literally people were punching things into a calculator. So this last year in 2022, we went from manual calculations to formula-driven spreadsheets, collaborated with auditor's office to develop automatic import from our paper spreadsheet, our spreadsheets into the Oracle pay system. And we collaborated with the treasurer's office for the November election to pay our 3,800 workers in just 3 weeks. So we were fast, but still not fast enough. We wanted to make it better. So we went to electronic time clock solution, and we implemented that for the first time in the May election. And it was successful. Compliance was, you know, a little spotty. We had to coach some people up a little bit, you know, a new implementation. That's always going to be a little bit of a problem. But for the most part, it worked great. We also contracted with a vendor to actually issue the checks or to issue the cash to our workers. And we're really glad that we did that, because if you don't know, the county's gone through they're going to a new Oracle system. It's been a bit of a challenge. Certain people in the sheriff's department weren't paid for 6 weeks, and certain in the DA's office, and our own workers here, some of our workers haven't been paid for overtime for the last 2 months. And so this conversion to this new Oracle system has been a little messy, which is to be expected with a major system change like that. So by us taking the poll workers out of that system, we avoided a disaster. And so by using the new electronic time clocks and using this vendor to issue payments, instead of paying people in 3 weeks, which could have been 3 months for all we know, we paid people for the May election in 10 days. Never been done before. For the June runoff election, we paid people in 6 days. So huge, huge project, huge success. Little bit of drama with it, because for a very small number of people, I think we had about 25 complaints out of our 1,500 people. Some people, when you're paid, you're issued a debit card. And you own a debit card and it just gets populated with money once it's ready. Some people don't like to use the debit cards. They say, I want a check. And so there is a check option, and the check option is not just a standard check. It's a blank check. Basically, you have to make a phone call. They say you have to write the 6-digit number down there and put this amount. And so it's an extra step. But they're paid in 6 days instead of the 23 days. And then for the June election, we also had the implementation of a new direct deposit option. So there's 3 options to be paid: direct deposit, by debit card, or by check, as opposed, and you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to come pick it up. It's just there. As opposed to in the past, we had hard checks and we said, hey, you want to drive down here and pick up your check, or do you want us to mail it? And then when we mailed it, there was a certain percentage of it that always got lost through the county system. It's like a 3-week process to replace a lost check. So this whole new system is wonderful. And we're about to do a survey of our poll workers too. We think it's wonderful. We're going to find out if they think it's wonderful with the survey, see how they like it.
Well, I just want to compliment you on that. At first it was very difficult to understand. In the May election, some of my poll workers didn't get the card, and that was unfortunate. I don't know why that happened. Some got them, some didn't. I used the card, a bit reluctant at first, but then when I found out what it does, wonderful. I even put it in my wallet, and I understand now that in future elections, there's no delivering of cards needed. You just get it repopulated each time.
Yeah.
I think once people understand what the benefits of that process are, they will like it.
And some of the feedback I received, the clerks were told to get the information from the judges. And the judges felt like they didn't have enough information themselves to share. And the clerks were reaching out to them after they were not getting paid. They didn't receive a check, they were calling, people didn't know. And so everybody finally was paid. But there was a week, or maybe 2-3 weeks when people were still looking for checks or looking for something. But they were reaching out to the judge of whatever that election day judge was, because they were told to reach out to that person would get information.
I got to challenge you on that. People were paid 10 days. And now there was a handful of people, dozen people. I don't know what the numbers were, that were paid maybe in 17 days, but most of those people is because they didn't do something. They didn't give us their social security number. They didn't do something.
I don't know. I never could find out the reason why certain people did not get paid. But I had people at least a week after reaching out to other people within the community trying to find out, did you get paid? Did you get paid? Did you get a check? What happened? What happened? And then we were another 10 days out and they were still trying to get paid. And then they were told, and I don't know who they expressed to me that they were told to contact their election day judge. And I was like, that didn't even sound right. But, that's just information. I'm just relaying the information given to me.
So my inspector, and I don't know who theirs was, my inspector did a very good job of explaining that portion. So I know that it was part of their training. That he even gave us the phone number of who to contact, because that would be payroll.
Right.
If you have any challenges or have any questions.
And it's new.
It's possible.
And so there's always going to be some newness, and it's like a new procedure, and there's going to be some people uncomfortable with that. There's other people uncomfortable with change. So hopefully it settles in, and we're, the June election was super. So hopefully by November, we'll have all the kinks worked out. And as far as not all the people get cards, this was lightning speed implementation. The vendor, when we were talking with them, they were like, you're crazy. You're never gonna be able to do this in this amount of time. We can't, we'll do what we can, but so we had those people who didn't get cards, typically it's because we didn't get the judges didn't give us their names fast, because we write the judges and we say, give us the name of your workers, give us the name of your workers, give us the name, we have to harass them. And when they give us the name of their workers, we issued on cards, and they got to print the cards and all that.
And maybe that's probably what they meant, is that those cards were given to the judges. And maybe the judges had those cards.
They weren't
No,
given to.
no, they only, we didn't allow that.
Okay.
It had to be direct to the person.
Direct to the individual, okay.
Because we were worried about that.
Okay.
We didn't want to- overall, I think it's great. We'll see what the survey says. Because, you know, who knows, people might say I hate it, but I think it worked out wonderful. I think people like getting paid in 6 days. And I think they will get used to the debit cards, or if they don't, the direct deposit now, that takes a little bit of computer work too, which is sometimes a challenge for some of our older workers. But I think we've got pretty good help online to help them through that. I think we're gonna create a little video for that too, Nick, right? To help them with that, so they can, it'll be direct deposit, they'll never have to do anything, just be in their account.
Is the goal for early voting to electronically sign in also eventually?
That's remains to be seen, depends on this, this survey, frankly, because early voting workers got caught up, they're still being paid through the old county system, right, through Oracle. And, you know, if the results are strong, you know, if people say, I love this new system, that gives us the evidence to go to the auditor and commissioner's court and say, let's move these guys over to this new system also. We'll see, because right now they're still filling out paper, et cetera. So a little bit, you know, I'm hoping that we can move on to the new system. Communications team, Nick back there, this was in just the 2022 stuff, lots of stuff going on there. I'm just gonna skip by these, talking about the voter awareness campaign. The biggest deal was that for this election, we did not spend the money. We spent $605,000 in November. We went to the jurisdictions, participating jurisdictions. Do you want to spend money on a voter awareness campaign? And they did. So, and so we did kind of a low cost campaign through Facebook and things like that to try to get the word out. And so we're going to continue, or going into a major election. We've already put money into our budget for some outreach, and we'll go back to Commissioner's Court, take their temperature on how much they want to spend, if any, on you know, kind of more big outreach type of events. I can tell you that we got a new outreach coordinator. Jayla back here is our new outreach coordinator. So we've got education and outreach coordinator. We've got a voter registration outreach coordinator. We've got Nick, the communications manager, who's overall them. We've got a Vietnamese language outreach person, Spanish language outreach person, and then public service over the counter telephone coordinator. So the communications team has gone from like a 2-person team to now a 6-person team. So putting a lot of investment in communications. Voter registration team. I kind of talked about how we really haven't, coming in here, I kind of evaluated all of our needs. And, you know, you can't do everything once. And so we've been methodically moving from department to department, fixing the most important things. Voter registration hasn't been one of them. But this is the summer of voter registration. And because we're getting ready for the big year, and what you'll see in voter registration is over a 4-year cycle, you'll see a little bump in a gubernatorial year, and then you'll see a giant increase in the presidential year. So we're getting ready for that giant increase. And so we may be doing an RFP for a new voter registration system. Our voter registration system is very old. And we've got a vendor that has a newer system that we may go to, or we may look to a new system. The state, in fact, has an RFP for a new voter registration system that's coming out, that's out right, well, I don't know. Yeah, it's out right now. And they're going to try to implement theirs before the presidential primary. I'm a little skeptical. In theory, we should be able to use their system. We don't even need our own system. But the current statewide system is so weak that it's not usable by a large county. So that's why we have our own system that ties into the state system. But we'll see, a lot of fluctuation, a lot of remains to be seen as far as voter registration system for 2024. Then our new voter registration outreach program that Nick is, and his team are really putting together. And I think I'm gonna talk about that at the very end of this presentation. Mail ballots, I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics for the these are the 2022 stuff, and we were gonna put 2023 stuff, and we did put them in, but they were very low. The numbers were extraordinarily low. Less than 1,000. Like that. 1,200.
1200 to 830.
Yeah, very low, but the system is working well. The biggest change in mail was, we were getting, in fact, your pointer, Mr. Griggs, Commissioner Summerman said, Mike, why? I talked to people and they say they didn't get their ballot. Requested it, but they didn't get it. And we look at our records and we say, we sent it. And so this has been an ongoing problem in elections with the USPS for years. And in fact, in 2009, I had this problem with a vendor and with post office where 18,000 people didn't get their ballots. They eventually got them, but they were late because of a vendor mistake. And at the time I said, there's gotta be a way to track ballots. And looked, and there wasn't. So we partnered with a company, local company in Denver, and we invented a system. You know how you can track your package with with UPS? We invented that system for mail ballots, so that you could, you could sign up to get notifications as a voter to say your ballot's been as an email or a text or a phone call that would say your ballot's been printed today. Your ballot's been dropped in the post office, been delivered to the post office. Your ballot is being delivered to your home today. And then on the way back, your ballot has been delivered to the local post office. Your ballot has now been received by the elections department. Your ballot's been counted. So it kind of tracks the path of the ballot through the entire process. And that helps the voter, but it also helps us so we can find out if the post office is doing their job, because they lose a lot of ballots. And so we built that system in 2009. It's kind of gone national now, recently, in the last couple of years. State of California uses it, state of Colorado, a lot of mail ballot states use it. And so I reached out to my old friends in Colorado and said, we really would like to see a system like that here. We implemented a pilot program to implement that, the outgoing stage of that this year. And we're tracking our ballots now. You don't have the round trip where on the ballots on their way back in yet, because that's going to require a redesign of our carrier envelope and permission from the Secretary of State to do that. And so we're working on that for 2024. Voting sites, I kind of talked about poll workers and
First, quick question before we leave mail balloting. I noticed at the bottom, you have a total rejected with 602 and missing or incorrect ID from the Senate Bill 1, 318 and a percentage of 1.3 versus 6%. So how do you make that decision? Who looks at those ballots? What is your procedure for determining ones that are rejected?
Sure. First, let me answer a question about statistics or clarification. These are from the November election. They were there as a point of reference. And that's why I apologize. I didn't have the same numbers for May. But what I'm hoping to see with May is the same trend line. So with the implementation of SB 1 last March, and then using it again in May, and then using it again in November, what we saw is the rejection rate went from 6% down to 1.3%. And that was part of, thanks to Nick and other people and the League of Women Voters and other people, educating people how to fill out all this crazy paperwork that you got to do for this state of Texas. And so people are getting used to that crazy paperwork, so that the percentages are going down. As far as who rejects those, that's something called the Early Voting Ballot Board. It's an independent body that sits and they make those determinations about what is rejected.
So that's not your staff, that's a program that's set up.
Yeah.
Part of that, so.
Yeah. In the state of Texas, they don't trust election administrators very much. And so there's all these election judges are their own boss, early voting ballot boards their own boss. And so there's a lot of, I get all the blame, but not all the control. And so the early voting ballot board is in control of that process. We work with them and we try to coach them, and they use our facility. They are an independent body. So voting sites team did a lot of things to, I already talked about this a little bit, to retain poll workers, recruited more, increased the poll worker pay, recruited backup poll workers from the county, which we haven't had to use now for since last year. Really recruiting students hard, and just having an overabundance of people so that we can prepare for those no-shows. The big thing with the voting sites team is big success this year going into the May election is they resurveyed over 500 locations. We had really bad information about our locations. We didn't know the size. We didn't know the number of plugs. We didn't know the lighting. We didn't know a lot of things, contact information. So we went out with iPads, took videos, took pictures, resurveyed those entire, looked for ADA compliance, presented that information to the Vote Center Advisory Committee. They used it to, as you guys know, you participated, to make some decisions about getting rid of some bad locations or not. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Down in, what's the name, Dr. Levels?
The last one I was gonna ask you, 4 Oak Cliff, was that added?
I don't know. I was thinking of that one area down in Southern Dallas.
Oh, Joppy.
Yeah. So that one was a bad ADA
Mhm.
compliance, but there was nowhere else to go. So it's like, okay, let's do some remediation to try to make it a better location.
Ms. Fowler was very pleased with that decision.
So that was a huge win for the voting sites team, in addition to,
Did we know anything about 4 Oak Cliff? Did anyone ever go out and visit the location, the site?
I don't know anything about, I'll tease Kyle and ask, but I don't have any updates. I'm still catching up. I just got back on Monday.
Okay.
yeah, so you guys know Melissa, my that assistant, has been out for the last month.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
The other big change or something new was jail-based voting at Frank Crowley. We did a pilot project there. Second county in the state to do that. Harris County had done it 2 years ago. I think it went pretty well. And I think we're going to continue to do it as long as the sheriff will let us. So, question.
Good question. I seem to remember that there were some sites that we were still trying to get to do the evaluation on. Did we then complete all of the sites?
I believe so, yeah. And more. It's not only their existing sites, but potential sites, right? Of course, we'll talk about that tomorrow night. Training team, there's a whole new training program. They continue to build more and more videos, more and more little video vignettes and try to incorporate a lot more online training. So we're building that a little bit a piece at a time, little add-ons. Also, for instance, this year, there was a big piece about the e-poll vote training. That was a whole new component that they had to build. And so you'll continue to see little improvements in that, but for the most part, the training program using some of the recommendations of the subcommittee from here, has continued to get better and better. And, I think we've got really good compliance. Now, what, like I said, we'll look at those evaluations and we'll look for trends. Well, what aren't we training well? We'll continue to tweak that and emphasize those things in the training. During our training. Logistics team. I think we had, well, I can tell you this, a couple of years ago, we had a lot of shortages because we never had checklists. We weren't holding people accountable. We have a checklist for everything now as far as what we're packing, et cetera. And so hopefully you're not seeing shortages. You got well packed, well thought out supplies and that they're usable. And so we're still looking at modifying some of those things. Some of that's dependent. I think we got to have all new signage this year because of changes in the law. Let's see, we're still evaluating that. There's some, I think there's some stuff for ADA access. That would change. So we did have some issues in 2022. We had, believe it or not, we had some provisional shortages. It's because people stopped using the checklist. I know this, I don't need to use the checklist. And then they screwed up. And so we're saying, you're not using your checklist, you're getting written up. And so we're continuing to morph into a more sophisticated way of doing that. We've now digitized all of our ESCs, all of our electronic equipment, our chairs, our tables. We're beeping them in and out with barcodes and electronic scanners. And doing a little bit more of that with our checklist too. We have an electronic checklist rather than paper checklist. Central count team. This was the 2022 things. We rebuilt that whole room. Secretary of State will tell you that we have the best central count station in the state, with the live streaming, big monitors for poll watcher friendly. And we continue to make those improvements this year for the May election. We upgraded our ballot tabulation hardware. So in other words, we got all new computers for ballot tabulation because our ones are getting a little old. We now trained our staff to do our own ballot design and programming. And so like last November, when our vendor was doing our programming, some of our ballots like that, more the unelected candidates or people that didn't need to be voted on, but they needed, because of the new law, they needed to appear on the ballot. It's confusing for people because you had to, at the end of your ballot, you had to more, all these buttons. Poorly designed screen by our vendor, because the vendors, they do a good job, but they don't care as much, right? They're clicking the box just to get it done. And so we're spending more time having our team do their own ballot design and their own programming, bringing that in-house instead of paying the vendor $1,900 a day per person. We're doing it in-house. We did a total revision of our ballot proofing process this year, because we had a proofing issue in November. So for the May election, that went really well. We've got a new backup tabulation location, part of our security plan. If we had a tornado and this building got knocked down, we've got an alternate location to bring our part of our food plan, our continuing operation plan. And so, and then our central count plan is a very comprehensive plan now, and we also have a daily log. So when we get sued, not if, when we get sued, we have accurate information, what happens minute by minute in that central counting room. So it's all part of our kind of being ready for worst case scenario. That's a best practice now that's going to be, I think, implemented around the state. This is the hardware issues. Historically, this is how they were reported. So we had preparation issues, technical issues, user error issues, so we kind of summed things up. And so that's where we're starting to get to a little bit more detail that you saw earlier. This is contrasted. So we may have some blend of this old way of reporting and that newer way of reporting. Still kind of figuring that out. And so I don't know if you guys have any feedback, just looking at the way it was reported before, you know, the preparation issues, technical issues, user error issues, as opposed to that more detailed report that we presented today. So for the joint election, we implemented a new electronic management system for inventory and storage of our equipment. So now we've got, believe it or not, we didn't know, in fact, the county as a whole, I don't know if you've seen this, but the county as a whole doesn't really know how many computers it has. And they've hired a new vendor now to try to get a hold of this electronic equipment. But the same was true here. We, you know, weren't sure what we had where, and paper driven stuff over here, stuff over there. And so we've now got a new inventory system, a new shelving system where we beep a piece of equipment, we beep it into the shelving where it's stored, and then we have proper rotation. You know, we got an excess of equipment. We were using the same equipment over and over and over again, while the old equipment just sat on the shelf, or the new equipment sat on the shelf. And now we're using, you know, we're rotating it, so everything gets used about the same amount. So it doesn't, some of it doesn't wear out and some of it's brand new. So big change for hardware, continuing to make that improvement in that inventory management. Migration to a new AT&T private access point. I'm not sure what that means, but it's related to our Cradle points, basically. Our Cradle points, when we said there was those 40 locations that couldn't get good coverage, we're looking at potentially going to new Cradle points that are on newer technology, but that would be a major investment by the county. So we're IT departments evaluating that right now. Our GIS team, we continue to build tools with wait time tools. For instance, that's the public facing one where we saw it was a 12-second wait. For November, it was a 3.7-minute wait. Question here.
I didn't hear you talk about the precinct lines. What was the feedback on the precinct line?
We have one issue for the May election. Well, I'll say this first. The round 1, round 2.
Mm-hmm.
So round 1, we had new election precinct information. This was back in 2022 or after the redistricting, or late 2021. It was late coming from the legislature, then late from because of late Census Bureau, late information, late legislature, late Commissioners Court, and then we're stuck at the end where we got to rush to do the really tough part, and that's the precinct line. And so then we had to, every time a city that it gives us new lines, because cities aren't required, they're not on a timeline. The state's mandated, but the city can give it their new lines whenever they want. So we've had like 4 rounds of city, new lines. And every time City of Dallas just gave us their lines in December, for instance. And so then we had to redo everything again and reproof those lines. And the thing about city lines is they don't always agree. One city thinks the boundary's here and another city thinks the boundary's here, or, and so it's getting them to agree on what their lines are. And going through, and so that whole process, we hired a company to help us proof our stuff, right? And we're continuing that process. And it'll be a continual process of them looking at our lines, what we've done, re-precincting every time, those 4 rounds. And we did have one block where the line was a block off. And it was it affected 2 voters, I think, that had voted. One was a mail ballot voter, and we gave him a new ballot, and then 1 voter, I think, cast a vote in the wrong place. So, and, you know, it's just what happens in elections where it's every 10 years, it's always a challenge when there's redistricting. Because you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of points and addresses. So GIS, our GIS team is fantastic. We've gone to a new enterprise GIS because the county is now being more aggressive. And they're managing purchase of this GIS equipment. So we're getting more sophisticated GIS equipment with this enterprise class equipment. And we continue to build tons of tools that we use internally. You look up on these boards on election day, we can see where our cars are at, we can see where they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And we're continuing, we're looking to do a new one, in fact, where we may, you know, right now, we have a technical issue in the field and we send a technician. It's a little bit of an awkward process. We have a ticket, we have 3 sheriffs over there that are deploying, that are reading this. They're saying, well, send this guy to this location, send this guy to this location. And it's a little slow and maybe not the most efficient. So we're going to develop kind of a Uber type of thing where we have people out in the field that are just they'll see a ticket pop up on their screen and they'll say, oh, there's an issue that here's a red versus a orange versus a green, you know, prioritized tickets, I guess. They'll go self-service and they'll go to that location and we can track them then. And so instead of us being deployers, we'll be monitors to make sure that we can then use more resources in the field and get to these problems faster. So we continue to develop these tools, but we've got all sorts of internal tools that we're using with GIS, and it's wonderful. It's a powerful tool.
I have a comment about the wait time tools, so forth. I believe that the explanation and training on how to do the wait time recording was done better for the May election than I've seen it before. I really think that was improved. And the little orange card that we got this time, it was bright. You couldn't miss it. It reminded you. And I mean, every time I was prompted to do it, I did it this time.
Good.
And the orange card was very helpful to write it down as well.
Yeah.
So that was a brilliant idea. I think it made a huge difference. I hope you'll keep that.
Absolutely. Thanks for the feedback. And, you know, form design is a big deal. And if you want to see bad form design, look at the state of Texas mail ballot stuff. You want to see good design, you look at forms like that. And so we spend a lot of time on form design. And every time we see a trend where somebody's not doing something right, it's because of maybe some bad form design or some bad instruction. And so we try to, like I said, we invest a lot of time in that.
Well, the orange card was very obvious and it was sitting on the table. So that was a good choice.
Yeah. Thanks. Software and tech support, I can just tell you that we've got a fantastic resource for us, Dan Suffolk and his team, that we now have we have not only Stan, but we have a programmer, we have a business analyst and desktop support. And so we have full IT support now. It took a while to get that team in place, but we're building our own solution. So sometimes you buy these vendor solutions and they're a little awkward, they're not customized. And so we're building our own, that GIS solution. For instance, I talked about our help desk system, we're building our own system. We're building our own poll worker management system. So those are, when we do that, we'll become even better at some of these things. So and we use these Power BI reports. We're having our data centralized instead of a whole bunch of spreadsheets throughout this building where people aren't using the same information. We centralize all of our information in a central location and then teach our people to pull it from that single source of truth. We did the vulnerability assessment with DHS this last year. And we continue, the IT continues to harden our systems, especially going into a presidential year, which is going to be critical. So that's the kind of the report on the election, the tactical plan, kind of the highlights of what we've been doing. I want to move then to the next section. Get to do that?
Yes, absolutely.
So report on the vote center advisory committee activities and discussion on presiding judge and alternate judge appointment. Kind of combine those two together because they kind of related. So the VCAC activities, they met 8 times in January, February. And they came up with a low turnout model, which was 370 locations down from 470 locations. Commissioners Court approved that. We implemented it for the May election. I think it helped, reduce, the personnel problems, reduce our costs, et cetera. Now they've been meeting in June and July, developing the high turnout model. We're going to meet tomorrow night. We think we've got a plan in place to move very quickly, where we think we can get through the rest of the county tomorrow. And so that'll give us the first round, and then we'll look, the next meeting after that, we'll firm things up. We'll look at those things that are kind of on the bubble, those harder decisions, because we're kind of making the easy decisions first. And then we'll go back and make those harder decisions. We'll probably get SMU to weigh in a little bit to see if they've got any thoughts, because they've been participating. We will present that tentative plan, actually probably after next week, to the political parties. And what we have to do, well, and so we'll give that to the parties because they're recruiting for these locations and they're dying to know which locations we're going to use. And so we're going to bring that plan to the Commissioners Court in August, either the 1st or the 15th. We're not sure yet. And we're also going to have the VCAC also weigh in on early voting locations. Historically, they haven't done that, but we feel like early voting is like half our voters. And so we want to get their feedback on these locations and really take a hard look at them. I don't know that will be an official recommendation, that goes to approved by Commissioners Court, because it's not required, but I think it will be one that their recommendation will mean a lot.
Would there be any adjustments on the time for early voting and dates?
The dates for early voting are mostly dictated by the state. In fact, there's a new bill, or we just talked about it in a meeting with the Secretary of State today, for the runoff elections. The one in December, they're going through a lot of struggles with that because of this new law and figuring out when to do it. If it gets too close to Christmas or too close to Thanksgiving. So but that will be dictated by the state. The times are a little bit, they're dictated by us, Commissioners Court, in a November election, but a May election, they're dictated by the participating jurisdictions because they're the ones who pay it. Their election. We're just a hired gun for a May election. I just run the election for them. They kind of make all the decisions, and we have a contract with them. They hire us through that contract. And so that brings up one issue that you may have heard about. In East Dallas, there was a early voting, or the lack of an early voting location, some people said. And that was not our decision. That was the decision of the participating jurisdictions. And I think what we're going to try to do is to provide a little bit more guidance to them next time, to try to do a little more of the analytics and say, hey, well, you might consider having one here. But I don't think it was done out of any malice. It was just, an oversight for that particular part of town.
Along with that, not just having a location or not in a certain area, but also the times. I think that Dallas County should take a stand and provide a standard. Of course, ultimately, that's their own decision. But when you look at a city of Irving and a Richardson and a Cedar Hill, Duncanville, and they all have different times, that's very confusing.
Yeah.
I work in Richardson, but I'm voting in Cedar Hill, and I have to drive to Cedar Hill. But I listen to my coworkers, and I'm hearing what's going on here. I think it's just a lot of confusion because we know that it's common. for the November election, and the primary is coming. But when the May election comes around, people are confused on the times and the days, especially taking away that Sunday, or that Sunday time was a problem.
Well, what is interesting about that, the jurisdictions, we've been using the same times for a while, but this time someone had mentioned that Tarrant County was going 10 to 4 instead of 1 to 6, I think it was. And so the jurisdiction said, well, let's go 10 to 4. Okay, they're the boss, right? And so I think they were trying to be consistent with the other county in this particular case. That was the change.
Yeah, for Sundays. I think that we need to look at best practice and listen and get more feedback from the community, because typically on Sundays, most people are voting, your churches, your pastors, and they are the ones trying to get people to get out to vote on that Super Sunday. And when times are changed and some churches don't get out to 2 o'clock, and they're normally accustomed to gathering, having lunch or dinner, whatever the family time is, then we're gonna come back and we're gonna make sure everybody votes before 6 o'clock. That can be a conflict. So if we can be consistent with that, I think this is the first time with that change that we've communicated that change is big for a lot of the church pastors, for our churches.
Right. And I think that's the type of feedback, for instance, the BCA can provide, because I think that that's for this group. Because that's, we can kind of have it, I can say something, but it has a lot more meaning when it's coming from a committee, because that's the community speaking. So I would, and that's one of the reasons we want to have early voting, even though it's traditionally has been with BCAC, we want to get BCAC's feedback because it is half our voter.
Well, it's difficult to have 2 consecutive meeting nights. I can't be there tomorrow. So I'm expressing my opinion now.
Okay.
Because I cannot be here tomorrow. So for the record,
Gotcha.
Sundays, we need to go back to the 6 p.m. time. And whatever that is, if there can be a communication just to the Ministerial Alliance. There are so many religious organizations that meet on Sundays in all populations, in all areas. If we can just send them out communications that we know this is what it was, but this moving forward, we're going to go back to whatever. I think there needs to be communication, because there were some issues on that Sunday. People didn't know until that day. Because people just assumed. We've been voting that way for years.
Michael, real
Yes.
quickly, on the East Dallas issue, of course, a lot of people were very concerned about that, social media and other things. Lots of people just aren't in the know in terms of how things work, who's responsible for I think that would be a wonderful, we're talking about the videos, kind of throwing everything at Nick, but I think that would be a wonderful way to educate people on why that is. It also would put those municipalities in a position where they're answering to their constituency in terms of doing that, not just making decisions based on, economic considerations.
Right.
That's a huge thing. I mean, not having enough early voting in East Dallas was, troublesome for a lot of folks.
Right.
But, where does the buck stop? And that's what people need to know, so that there's, proper vetting of people doing things right, proper protocols in place. I think that'd be an excellent way to communicate those things. And me, like you, we didn't have YouTube kind of growing up and doing those things, but lots of people do now.
Yeah.
It's a situation where they can just go to it, see what it's all about, making it really easy and accessible.
And that's a big part of what Jayla and Nick are doing. They're doing these little 30-second vignettes and things like that, a lot more of that social media, getting stuff out social media wise, which would include, for instance, the change in times, things like that. So a big part of their communications plan. Presiding judge appointments. Of course, presiding judge appointments to a certain extent are dependent upon the vote center assignment. So VCAC has to do their part. And then Commissioners Court has to do their part, but there is some change that I want to make you aware of. So it used to be when we were precinct-based voting, if the Democrat won this precinct, there was a Democratic presiding judge, vice versa with a Republican. The vote center plan is based off of percentages. So it's the percentage of people who vote for the Republican or Democrat for governor in a commissioner's district. And then that's split in the district and in the county overall. And so in the past,
What now? Can you please? say-
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah, so. So in the past, in 2018, 72% of our vote centers, based off this formula, were Democratic presiding judges, and 28% were Republican presiding judges. Now, because the Democrat in the 2022 election won at a higher rate, 80% of the vote centers will be Democrat and 20% will be Republican. So, and that's all based off of kind of a formula of who won which precincts. And so we apply that formula from the precincts to the nearest vote center. We haven't done that part yet. We know the math. When we do apply, it'll be 80-20. But what we'll do is we'll look at, here's a vote center, and should this be a Democratic or Republican one? And we'll look at the nearby, probably using GIS technology, the nearby turnout or who they voted for results in those nearby precincts. We'll say, oh, this looks like this should be a Republican one. This looks like it should be a Democratic one. So it's a very complex formula that we haven't yet applied. I mean, the last time we applied it was 2018, or actually 2019 when we moved to vote centers. So it's been static since then. And now that we have the 2022 results, we'll reapply it.
Will you be able to list which ones are Democratic?
Absolutely.
Republican?
Yeah.
Like months before?
Absolutely. We'll know in August when they go before Commissioner's Court.
Based on that formula, because that formula it could make something wrong. Based on the community.
Was it applied to the May election?
No. It's not.
So if the precinct, if the judges change for May, then we can't count on that being the way it's done.
The judges for May were still part of the 2-year assignment. So judges are assigned for 2 years. So they were assigned or appointed in 2022. I'm sorry, 2021 through 2023. So now they'll be appointed in 23 through 2025.
Well, maybe we can talk offline
Yeah.
about an exception to that.
And I've contemplated, because we have so many vacancies, in a two-year appointment's a long time. And so we've contemplated making it a 1-year appointment. By law, you can do it either way. I don't know. I think we want to get the feel from the parties on that, because ultimately the parties are the ones that have to deal with it. And so we'll be meeting with them and talking about that 1 or first 2-year appointment. And of course, there's a new Democratic Party chair. We don't have to get his take on it. And then, of course, they'll go to Commissioner's Court. Here's one change that we are making, though, and we did make last year. So people were appointed in 2021, and then in 2022, we had some replacement appointments because for people who dropped out, things like that. What I'm trying to convince the parties, and they bought into this a little bit this year, but we want to think about it deeper. And I want to get your feedback on this. If you got location A, I'm sorry, location 1, 2, and 3. And 1 is a Democrat, 2 is a Republican, 3 is a Democrat. The way the law works is that if the Democratic judge who's appointed to that location by Commissioner's Court, if he drops out, the alternate presiding judge takes over. So now you've got a Democratic location now becoming a Republican location. And same thing and vice versa in the second spot. What we did to a certain extent in 2022, last year for our replacement appointments, we said, don't appoint individuals to a location through the appointment process through the Commissioner's Court. Because if because the law allows you to just appoint a whole bunch of judges and a whole bunch of extra judges. And so instead of appointing, in theory, say there's 450 locations, and it's 400, I'm making up numbers, 400 Democrats and 50 Republicans. instead of, or let's say 350 and 100. Instead of appointing 350 Democrats to individual locations, every single one of them, you could just point 500 Democratic judges, generic judges, and then assign them to those locations as they're available. And the advantage of that is if a Democrat's not available for that location number one, you just go to the next Democrat, go to the next Democrat, the next Democrat. You don't go to the alternate Republican judge. And so the parties get to keep their assigned locations. Likely to keep their assigned location. And of course, that, in theory, that works great. But there's some judges and some commissioners and some party leaders that they say, no, in order to recruit this guy, I need to give him this location. They don't want to be a generic judge. That's okay. We can have a blend. So of our 350 Democratic judges, you got 250 of them that rock solid, this is their location. You got another 100 that are generic. The idea is to have a lot of you don't want one-to-one relationship. You don't want one voting center, one judge. Because then when that judge falls out, it goes to the party, and also you got to recruit a new judge instead of having the next guy just be ready in line. So because we did that last year, that's one of the reasons we've got a surplus of judges now. We didn't have a problem in November. We didn't have a problem in May because we got extra people waiting in line. So that's
pros and cons for sure. I actually was thinking about that as the con is that, every location is different. So I know as a judge, when people know their location, like I could set up my location now probably in 45 minutes. The first time I did it, it took probably 5 hours. You know what I mean? So because of that, it can make a difference. I could definitely go to another place and figure it out, but
yeah.
like it can be stressful to find out the day before, oh, you're changing places. And it's like a different plan.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's just the
And
con.
some judges are gonna be flexible. They're gonna say, yeah, I'll be judge anywhere. Some are gonna say, no, I'm only gonna go here, or otherwise I'm not gonna do it. So that's the discussion with the parties about, and ultimately that's their decision. They'll at least give me the list, and then they give the list to the Commissioners Court approves it. I don't know, does anyone else have any thoughts about that? Generic appointments versus
I've
specific?
heard some things, I just can't remember right now what the feedback was. Seems that there was confusion that a certain judge that was there and another judge arrived. And they didn't understand why they were at the same locations or something. That's what I remember. That may not be accurate. So
I think I would say that that's probably has to do with the alternate presiding judge.
that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it
And
was.
so, and what happened there is it used to be that the Democrats would do the presiding judge at their location, and the Republicans didn't bother to do an alternate presiding judge because they just weren't as aggressive.
Right.
Now they've been much more aggressive at recruiting people. So now there's an alternate presiding judge showing up and someone says, well, who are you? I'm the alternate presiding.
Is there, because, I think we've all been judges at one point. I know I was always notified if my judge was, whether that person showed up or not. But I was assigned a judge, and there was a communication, and then we both, we communicated, we exchanged information, and we knew we had a plan and that and so forth.
And that's all
Are we
under
still
the,
doing that?
that's all
We are-
under
we are
assignment
still-
letter. The assignment letter says you've been assigned to this location. Your alternate presiding judge is this person. Here's their number if you want to get a hold of them. Then you need to recruit your clerks, blah, blah, blah. So you guys have seen that
Right.
letter, right?
It still happens.
That still happens, okay.
Now, I have to say one thing though, in the training for the municipal elections, if you are an alternate presiding judge and you get there and there is a presiding judge, you are the clerk.
Oh, okay.
That's what's stated in the training. So there's no confusion. So someone was confused, maybe they didn't remember that. So now you are the clerk, unless the judge needs to step out, then you can do the judge stuff.
And then in a joint election.
And a joint election, that's
They're equal.
correct.
A little bit, I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much variation in Texas law where it's confusing for people because the
Absolutely.
rules change election to election. depending on the type of election.
But it is confusing.
Well, you asked for feedback. That's the first I've heard of roaming judges concept. Because I've always been the judge or alternate in one place for almost 30 years. And I will say that the relationship you build with your alternate judge or vice versa is important. Because there's very much, even though we're different parties, we have a lot of trust between myself and the other person. And I mean, I fully trust that person. They fully trust me. I think if you mess with that relationship too much, it could be an issue. Because I do think there'll be a lot of people that would like to stay with the system of a judge and an alternate, and it be the same people through the 2-year period.
Right. And I think that that's the blend that we did last year. We said have the one-to-one relationship, but have extra judges. You don't appoint 469 judges for 469 locations. Appoint 550 and have some extras to put in the pipeline.
I have another question with regard to the joint judges for like a primary for one location. If I'm not mistaken, was the pay the same or was it different?
So I didn't want to talk about this because I didn't for this one, but I'll touch on it briefly because I think for the next meeting in October, we'll talk about this because it'll be timely then. The discussion about whether to have a joint election again. The biggest key I mean, there's lots of benefits for the parties. They don't have to recruit their polling places. They don't have to pay their own polling places. They don't have to, et cetera. But the biggest one is because the county conducted a joint election, we were able to pay our judges $20 an hour. If we hadn't had a joint election, it would have been paid $12 an hour. That's all the state will reimburse. So the state paid $12 an hour, the county reimbursed the difference. And we could do that because we were in a contract together as a joint election.
But I think it was one judge was designated the person to pick up materials. And
There was like, so who would have been the presiding judge was the person designated to pick up materials. So that'll be we'll probably have a big presentation on that next meeting. Probably September, October. 'Cause that's when we'll be in negotiating contract.
Fair enough.
Wow, can you hear me?
Loud.
Election judges should be given a judge's handbook and the required checklist during the mandated advance or refresher training sessions. Additionally, speaking earlier about retaining seasoned poll workers, the workers must be paid timely.
Good feedback. Thank you for that comment. So then the other thing, as far as the judge appointments, we are grading our poll workers now. And we're not, grading is probably the wrong term, we're providing feedback. And we're doing that kind of based on all of these elements. So did the judge show the I think I can see it though. I can see it. So the evaluation criteria, so I won't need to put it on the screen, I'll just. So we look at if you're appointed, did you show up for your appointment, for your assignments? Your training, did you attend training? Did you complete your your electronic timesheets, like, did you fill out or did you call in and say, I forgot to do my timesheets, here's my, do that. Did you complete your judge letter tasks? Because, we say, tell us who your poll workers are, confirm for us if you're gonna show up, tell us who your poll workers are. 95% of them do that great, 5% of them, we don't hear from them, we call them, are you gonna serve, are you gonna serve, are you gonna serve? Or your poll worker, can you give us your poll workers, and they don't respond. That's all part of their grade. Completion of their notebook checklist, all those checklists in there. Did you open on time? Did you complete your wait time tickets? Did you do your ballot and seal certificate properly? Did you fill out your provisionals properly? 2020, 50% of our provisional ballot envelopes were filled out improperly. And that just disenfranchises people. That's poll worker error, so we can't have that. Ballot return and reconciliation form, was that filled out properly? The inspector, when he comes around, he's got a checklist. Are they doing this? Are they doing this? They're grading. They're grading you when you're there. So looking at those grades. Responsiveness to our communications. We call certain judges, they don't pick up their phone. They don't turn on their phone. That's a big demerit, because we gotta have good communication.
That's their personal phone, correct?
No, that's a county
Okay.
assigned.
Site phone.
Um,
Yes, site phones. That was the-
Yeah, they give us a phone. It's in our box.
Okay.
Yeah.
Training participation, in other words, that's kind of like bonus points. If someone who's enthusiastic, who's interactive, it's like, oh, there's a potential judge, or someone who's sleeping at the back, that's a big merit, right? Communication and professionalism with our staff, we're not tolerating bad behavior, because some of our staff takes some abuse from some of our judges. When I say this, our judges are fantastic. We have a small percentage of trouble. So we're trying to say, we're professionals, but everyone needs to act professional here. Our inspector evaluations that I talked about, and evaluation of our complaints. So we got our election day complaints, right? The paper books. And so we got to take those complaints seriously. If someone's gone through the trouble of sending in a complaint, we've got to make sure that we evaluate it and talk. So we want to present these judges as well as the parties with, here's the grade, here's the evaluation of this judge. And it's your decision whether you want to assign this, because in the end, the parties, and then ultimately the commissioner's court has to live with them. If they want to appoint a bad judge, they got to live with the consequences. And if that judge doesn't perform, not on me, it's on the person who appointed them. So I think the parties are going to be very, as we've talked to them, they want this information. It's a comprehensive grading system is much better than this kind of anecdotal evidence. This guy's not too good. Well, what does that mean? Let's have this comprehensive, fair weighting of this score. So those are the pieces of the puzzle. We haven't quite sure about the weighting. We're kind of figuring that out. Someone who didn't pass out I voted stickers, okay, versus someone who didn't fill out a provisional envelope, or someone who didn't show up till 7:30 on election day. That's a big deal, right? So one will be weighted more than the other.
Will that feedback be given to the judges ultimately, or?
I think it's a discussion with the parties, because they are the parties appointees. We're going to talk it over with them. What do you want to do with these grades? Do you want to keep them confidential to you? Do you want to share them with the judges? I'm tending to want to share it with the judges, because it's, you want to improve and be better. Right.
How would the judge know that they're doing something wrong, not performing well, unless someone tells them?
But will there be some type of notification or pre-training available for those that want to participate? Because a lot of these judges are seasoned judges, and they've done this numerous times.
Right.
So is it a required training for those to come back in for this new evaluation criteria system?
Training for every major election is always required. And so the evaluation is not really, doesn't have anything to do with training. It's just evaluation of all the aspects of that I just kind of read through. Here's all the pieces and parts that make a good judge.
Correct. And and some have trained many years ago, and I know that they come back for annual training, and it's not as elongated as the original training.
Right, there's some
Because-
abbreviated training.
Exactly. So, and it's different when you're being assessed versus, you know, your job and you just do it. But now that you're gonna, that there's a checklist, there's an assessment, some people may say they may want some training.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely. And so our default position is we've got to train them right.
Right.
And our assumption is.
I don't want it to be a gotcha. You know what I mean? I don't want it to be-
Absolutely. Our assumption is if someone did something wrong, we're gonna assume it's us, that we gotta train them better. In some cases, that's not gonna be, in some cases, it's gonna be a judge with a bad attitude. But, you know, our assumption going in is, what do we need to do here to make it better? And so, but this grade, having this overall grade will help us. And some of this, a lot of the grading is based off of something they haven't done, you know, filling out their ballot seal certificate, big deal. Did we train that right? If 98% of the people are doing it right, it's probably training it okay.
Okay.
If 70% of the people are doing it right, we probably got a training issue. So, and I think most judges want to do a good job.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, like I said, the default is let's coach them up. It's not a gotcha. It's not a, you're fired. It's, hey, parties, here's, you know, I consider it a job. And it's a really important job, and so you'll want the best, right? You should want the best, so. Once we refine this a little bit more, if anybody's welcome to look at it, give us their feedback, especially those who've had this sort of experience in education and evaluation. We can always use feedback on that. Okay. Oh, lastly, preview of voter registration plan. We are in the middle of, this is our summer of voter registration.
Can you share it back online? Your PowerPoint is available for you to do that yet?
Yeah. It's good. So, while he's getting that online, so we've got a BDR program, voluntary deputy registrar program. What we're trying to do is to modernize that. Right now, we just kind of train a bunch of BDRs and, you know, 2,000 BDRs and 50 of them register a lot of people and, you know, 1,950 and don't do much, you know, that kind of thing. And you know, I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. And it's because we train them and we kind of hope they go to events. And it's kind of like, well, we trained poll workers and hope they go to a polling place. We don't do that. We assign people to polling places. We harass them. We make sure they go. So the BDR program, we want to do a little bit more of that type of helping the BDRs get to the events. Here's the list of locations. Here's the list of BDRs. Here's a map. BDR, you can look at this map. Here's you, and here's the events near you, you know, having some GIS capabilities, made it easy for them to go to these locations. Also, to work with the BDRs that we have BDRs that go to schools, where, and high schools, colleges, et cetera. We kind of let them run the show and we're not running the show. And so we want to play a more active part in making sure that we got comprehensive coverage, leveraging those BDRs at those locations. Having said that, sitting in a grocery store or at an event is basically, it's really not the most efficient use. You might have someone sit at an event all day and they get 6 registrations. So we know that BDRs are important for a presence as well as to actively recruit people to register. So I don't want to dismiss that, but there's other aspects of a voter registration plan that we're trying to leverage, and that's the leveraging social media to do a lot more to promote registration, and Nick's got some really great, and Jayla's got some pretty creative ideas on how we can do that within the confines of really antiquated Texas law that doesn't have online registration, unfortunately. So try to work around that archaic system as much as we can. A direct mail program, mailing to households that don't have a registered voter. New residence program, for all the, I mean, we have a lot of new residents coming into Dallas every year. So we want to hit them, working with NVRA agencies, national voter agencies that are governed by the NVRA that are supposed to be doing their job. They're supposed to be handing voter registrations to each person that they service. Some of them do, some of them don't, and it's a kind of a program to kind of get them to make sure they're doing the job. And then an NCOA program, basically, it's not so much about, that's about voter roll maintenance. So in the state of Texas, nobody does NCOAs. And with the USPS, which is a really bad idea, because NCOA, if you have an aggressive NCOA program where you're constantly knowing when people move, you can get ahead of them, make sure they're registered at their new address rather than waiting for them to show up on election day, and then they got to vote provisional, and then they get pissed and then they leave. So an aggressive NCOA, list meetings program is really important. We're developing that plan now. We're going to be presenting something to Commissioners Court potentially in August or September. There may be some funding involved, but it's really getting prepared for the presidential year.
NCOA stands for?
National Change of Address.
When this registration plan is presented, will we have an opportunity to see that prior to going to the Commissioner's Court? Or will we see it after?
We can send it to you, but we probably won't be meeting for it.
No, we don't have to meet.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today, we can share with you
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you. That'll be very helpful because, we're always having VDR training and scheduling all of that. And so whatever the plan is, if we can make sure that information is shared in our trainings, that would be great.
One thing, real quick, Michael, that you mentioned earlier about the optics behind voting, not only the actual registrations, but the change or the shift in culture. Incredibly important where we kind of engage. We have a relatively low Latino voter output in this county. But going to the places where we have Latinos and young Latinos, incredibly important. We may not be able to register unless we know VDRs have to be not necessarily aggressive, but they have to be moving. You're sitting at a table waiting at an event. Nobody's going to register. Nobody's going to come up to the table.
Yeah.
And many people are, afraid to do that, to engage, to be part of something that
Right.
For some reason might get them in trouble. If you want to be successful within certain communities, you've got to be more active. It's got to be a situation where you may have only signed up or done 10 registrations, but having the optics behind you that allow people to see it, say, hey, look, they're in our community. They're doing the things that are reaching out to us. It's okay. It's okay for me to look at. I may not register here, but I tell my kids they can register. I'm gonna tell it's okay to do this.
Yeah.
I would love to see communications in a campaign that puts more of an effort into kind of making those things happen.
I agree, Eric, and also consistency. We did one of the grocery stores over in Oak Cliff, and we did 8 consecutive Saturdays. After a while,
Right.
people were sending their grandkids and telling them, oh, go over there. I'm gonna send my daughter. Are you gonna be here next week?
Yeah.
I think that type of consistency as well at the same location, that gets people, talking more. And I think, like you said, you've got to be intentional. You have to go up to people. You can't just sit at the table because people are gonna register.
It's like the Girl Scout cookie model at the grocery store, every
Right.
Saturday they're gonna be
They're
there.
gonna be there.
And so that's dependent on a really good VDR and a lot of volunteers. We have limited staff, right? And so numbers, to kind of the final point on this is numbers are important in the investment that you have, but it's not the only thing. Measurables are important, but presence, having a presence is important too. So we recognize that. But
Joe's just kind of getting started on this. Just want to march the polls, always ready to work with the elections department to get people registered.
I think that's all I had. With that slide that was. Because we talked about the, just, you know, I'm not very right. Historically, the complaint summary, we went through the books before. We're not doing that, we're putting everything in NASDAQ. I talked about it. So that's all I had for today's meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I believe we did possibly achieve quorum. Just thought I would note that. Two people came in and basically came online, and they might have been bored, so there's like 9 as
Yeah.
well.
Unfortunately, we go with the open meetings, so we have to have a quorum that is present in-house, and I don't believe we've achieved that. We need 7 members to be present.
In-house.
So, right, so although the folks online get credit for making the meeting, we haven't developed a quorum this particular week. But thank you.
I think you need,
Fine.
you need that.
We need 7
Be 2 more.
to be present. Okay, any further discussion, any questions for Mr. Scarpello in terms of what he just relayed to us?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
So, Dr. Love was brought up something, so, you know, we asked you guys to come to 8 meetings in February, March. So many this summer, I mean, tomorrow night, rest of people meeting. And so I'm always worried about inundating with you guys with too much information. I always worry about not giving you enough. So what is the best way to communicate with you guys? Frequency, method, et cetera, between meetings? What would you expect? Feel like?
Levels, you want to take that?
For me, if, you know, this is a downtime this month. Is a downtime because I do that for myself for June. But once school starts in August, it's busy for me. But if I know in advance that for the I'm sorry, not the semester, before this quarter of the year, we're going to meet the 3rd Wednesday, whatever it's going to be, I can plan better in advance. 2 weeks notice really, I mean, it's hard for me with a 2-week notice sometimes, you know, when school is in, but I will adjust. I'll just show up when I can. I mean, that's what I tend to do.
Well, let me ask you this. So that's actually a different question, but it's an important one, and that's the setting of meetings. Is that the expectation for me to set the meetings, or is that for you guys to call your own meetings?
I think, of course, we have the ability when it calls for it, there's an import behind what it is we need to do. And I have the ability to call a meeting, and I'd certainly do that if a member of SEAC wanted to have a meeting, felt it was important enough, and I could make a decision doing that. I think the required meetings that we have are doable. And I think they're from your perspective in terms of when they're necessary, like something like today's meeting where we've gotten through the election, we're getting feedback in terms of what that is. You've had time to process all the information that you can to provide us with a good summary of what's happening. So those 4 meetings that we're required to have, it's probably okay for you to set them, or we could call them quarterly. The other stuff, though, I'd love feedback too. When we need something, and I might be in communication with Michael and the elections, maybe a little bit more than you guys individually. So whenever y'all feel compelled to do something, I would suggest you reach out to me, say, hey, look, we may need to have a meeting or not. Let's discuss it. I'm always open to that. And
what's the best way to communicate?
you send me an email. You can send me an email for the group. I would be sloth, of course, as Michael had pointed out last time, that when we do align, when we start talking about things substantively, we might be in violation of that. So we want to be careful about that. But setting meetings or requests to do something, there's nothing wrong with that. But just think about it in terms of the response. If we get into a substantive response, we've got to be careful about those things. We don't want to engage that way. But if somebody feels compelled to have a meeting for an important or particular reason, happy to discuss it or talk about it.
I just think if there's going to be a report that's going to go to the commissioners, because, you know, I have a very active commissioner And I'm held accountable being on this committee. And so if there's something that's going to go to the commissioner's court, if we can know in advance, or we can know, like I said, we don't have to have a meeting. We can just look at the report. I can glance. And I kind of, it will jog a memory from our previous meeting or from a previous discussion. And I can report back to the commissioner. Oh, yes, we've already talked about this, and this is the perspective, and this is what, we discussed. I can kind of couch it that way when I know in advance.
Let's do this then. So we have a mailing list. When I present something to Commissioners Court, I usually give it to the commissioners prior to,
Mm-hmm.
and I give it to the election commission prior to. I can put you guys on that prior to the list also. So it's like,
How much advance do you-
usually it's maybe by, no, it's not that.
That far?
No,
Okay.
probably the Thursday before a Tuesday meeting.
Okay.
At least we can try to see how it works.
What about for the meetings like this? Because I would have loved to have had this information before the meeting.
It just depends on what's going on. I mean, this one's hot off the presses because it wasn't as refined as we like to make it sometimes. I mean, there was a lot of copy and paste from the last meeting because I wanted to give you that update. So it just depends. I mean, depends on what's happening at the time. Sometimes stuff's last minute.
Can you all send this out to, especially the people online that didn't get a
Absolutely.
physical copy of it? And also, Mr. Chair, would you be willing to, or Jayla, to send us a list of names and phone numbers of our committee just among ourselves so that we
Absolutely.
can communicate?
Surely.
Yeah, I think you guys we just need an updated list. I did, we sent one out, Jalen? Updated? Yeah, we need to do that. So they can talk to each other.
If you have numbers, wouldn't have yours, David, I would imagine we can get in an email just providing the new information, the new folks. And then if we do have historical cell numbers and other things, I think that'd be wonderful too. Whatever you have, but I'll put out an email requesting that information and everybody can kind of have it.
And for Nick and Jayla, just like we have BCAC, we have a low, under our committees on our website, we have all the materials that we put out for their consumption. We do the same thing with SEAC.
Yes, I put the link in the chat.
Your first question though was, what would people like as far as communication between meetings? That was your first
Yeah,
question.
how much do you want?
Because I definitely would like communication between meetings. Our meetings are once a quarter, right? And there are always things happening in the elections area. So as far as how much we want, what I'm asking, I would like a manner to communicate between meetings. Right now, I just use Jayla as that one person. I think that works. I would like a manner to ask questions that's going to be responded to, or not ignored.
Well, perhaps I would suggest that you put out information to us that you feel, might be important or we might be considered important. I would just suggest to the members that we perhaps don't get into a line of discussion about what those things are, but we have, and we can digest the information, have the information. And then, if somebody says, hey, look, I think this is important enough that we have a meeting, let me know. We can set special meetings.
Well, so I'm talking, what I'm referring to would not be that formal. If I have a question about something that's happening, I want to ask one person.
Check in.
If you get a communication from me or from the DC Communications email or from Nick or from Jalen, what you're probably going to see is you're not going to see other people's names because we're going to blind carbon copy.
Right.
So no one can do the reply to all, and then we have the violation. And that's how we do it with commissioners. When I mail something to the commissioners, I always blind carbon copy them, each one of them. So they cannot carry on a conversation. We do that on purpose, so that be in violation. So if you see your name, assume everyone else gets it too.
I guess this is probably going to be something that I'm initiating, FYI. It's not based on data that's sent to me. It's based on a question that that I'm initiating.
Sure.
I probably would just send that to Jayla. That's okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's our point person.
Yep.
Okay, so that's for everybody.
Yep.
Everybody, all the SEAC members kind of listening. They will be our contact person.
Are we sending to Jayla or are we sending to DCE Communications? Nick, what do you think? Because that's monitored by multiple people. people, so.
Yeah, the entire comms team looks at DC. You want to be extra careful, you get CC, DCE communications.
It's like you generally could be on vacation or what, if you really want to, we like to go to more than one person.
Okay. With that said, I think we'll move to general public comments. Is there anybody online or in the audience today that has a public comment to make? And you guys are monitoring the online questions, chat, right?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything online?
Online.
Anybody here? Public comments?
Yeah.
Great job.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So, second.
Discussion? None? So moved.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
And close.
Teams channel, guys. Go and do the discussions and stuff, but it's the stupid old meetings that you
Yeah.
can't do.